Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to the Finding Financial Fitness Show. I'm your host, Nino Gonzalez, joined today by my co-host, Chen, and a special guest, Dr. Evan Schick. Doctor, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So context and background, Dr. Schick was one of my professors during my grad school. And what classes do you teach right now? Give us a little bit of background. What school you're at, classes you teach, what your background is.
I've been at Cal State Long Beach for 10 years. I think I'm in my 10th year now, actually. Along those 10 years, I've taught the same classes, which is I teach an undergraduate class. I teach 2 undergraduate classes and then 1 graduate level class. The undergraduate classes that I teach are one is centered around biochemistry of exercise, and then I get into endocrinology of exercise in that class as well. So it's sort of like metabolism meets hormones. And then the other undergraduate class that I teach is principles of strength and conditioning. And then the graduate class that I teach is advanced strength and conditioning. And that's specifically for master's students.
Yeah. And that's the class that I had with you back in, this was a few years ago now. And I remember this was right at the time where, as I've shared on this podcast before, I was a soccer player, just kind of high level. And then I transitioned after college into bodybuilding and primarily bro science. So for those that are familiar with bodybuilding, over the last 10 years, there's been this gradual shift towards evidence-based research and evidence-based science to back bodybuilding. But before that, it was all forums, all bodybuilding, muscle and fitness magazines, just listening to the guy who was the most jacked, basically. And I remember when I was in Dr. Schick's class, learning about the actual science underlying everything and debunking bro science and understanding why things really did work. And why I wanted to have you on is obviously the podcast, we discuss fitness, but also like Paige mentioned before, it's okay, well, how can people who are just starting out get started? So we'll talk about kind of just basic training programs, the basics of strength and conditioning to start out with. And then on the second half, I really want to geek out because your brain is very advanced. You study this a lot, and I have just very technical questions. But before we get started, can you explain? I know when we had spoke last week or a couple of weeks ago, I think you illustrated it very well about the research that's been done or that's currently being done in the last 15, 20 years, how you mentioned that radius and how it's expanding. Could you give that analogy? Because to me, that really helped to break it all down.
Yeah, a huge part of what we know in strength and conditioning and in exercise programming, that knowledge came through research that was done years ago. So a lot of the foundational things that we know now and that we use to program exercise and to execute proper technique during exercise, that research was done when I was a graduate student. So you're talking about from the year 2000 to maybe 2012, a huge bulk of that research was done, and we use it now. A lot of the research, but not all of it, a lot of the research is sort of more micro, more, I don't want to say fringe, but you're really expanding a small radius nowadays. So, for instance, we've known about the proper range of motion to use in basically most every exercise. We've done research on that for decades. Like the bench press, we know what the full range of motion is. We know that the best benefit from any exercise you do is through doing a controlled full range of motion. But recently, there's been research into like the exact velocity of lifting and the exact amount of time to pause and all these things that they're important to put data behind, but it's stuff that we have had data for, at least a certain level of data for a number of years. And I think that the analogy that I used with you is in the last, from the year 2000 to 2012, I'll say, we built a pool of research within strength and conditioning. And you can represent that by like a circle, like just a nice big circle. And in that circle is all that research. From 2012 to now to 2024, that circle has been expanding by very small radii, very, very small. That big central core circle of research was done years ago. And the stuff that we're doing now is in a very small way expanding that circle. I think when we spoke, I might have used the word fringe. Maybe that's not it's not the best word, but it is smaller level information. It's sort of innovating on ideas that were already invented. That's maybe a better analogy. We've invented the information through research. Now we're sort of innovating on the stuff that we've already invented. And it's smaller stuff. Doesn't mean that it's not important, but it is smaller. That said, there is some good original research still being done. That's not to say that there isn't. But, academically, and I mean, I can get into a whole tangent about academic research, but we have to publish. Professors have to publish. We do research. I do research. We have to publish in order to survive, and we have to publish in order to be promoted and make a good career for ourselves and get paid. And so we have to do research. And when that happens, sometimes you get motivated by really little ideas because, hey, it's a research study that I could publish and use for myself. And so some of that is what drives these really small changes, really small expansions in strength and conditioning research.
So given that most of the fundamentals have been pretty much honed in for at least the last decade, in your eyes, why do you feel there's so much difficulty associated for people to get started in terms of like someone like Pei who wants to get back into training, or people who are brand new, they go and they Google it or they go to the gym and there's just overwhelming information of what to do?
Yeah, you just said the answer. You asked the question, but the answer was in your question. It's because if you go to a public gym, like basically any public gym, there's a million people in there and they're all doing different things, and they're all doing different things in different ways. One way one person does a bench press is different than the dude who's doing a bench press or lady doing a bench press right next to him. You go to I talked about range of motion a moment ago. You could go to a squat, observe somebody doing a back squat. It's a barbell back squat. Two people, let's call it a guy and a lady right next to each other. The guy is got a shallow range of motion, like he doesn't go down that far. And maybe his heels are lifted on blocks. And then the lady right next to him is doing a traditional back squat, and her rear end is going all the way down to the floor, like really deep range of motion. Now, if I walk into that situation as a lay person and I'm like, okay, my doctor told me to do squats because they'd be good for me. I go into this public gym and I've never worked out before. I see a guy doing squats, what I believe to be squats, but his heels are raised on blocks. He's going down only like 7 or 8 inches. I've got a lady next to him, no blocks under her heels, and her rear end is going all the way down to the ground, like a huge range of motion. Which one do I pick? Which one? They both look pretty technical. So how am I supposed to know which one? So there's everybody does stuff in different ways. Everybody gets information from different sources. A huge majority of those sources are not vetted. And I feel like I'm being pretty kind in stating it like that. But these are, my students are going to social media. Let's not beat around the bush. They're all going to social media. And they show me things during office hours. It's always graduate students that feel more comfortable approaching me with questions. And usually during office hours, somebody pulls out a phone and they'll show me some post on social media. And they'll say, hey, what is this? What do you think of this? Is this a true thing or is this not a true thing? So a lot of what I do, especially during office hours, is like debunking stuff. So there's too many resources. It's kind of the big answer, which is kind of what you indicated in your question.
Yeah. And knowing all that, how do you design a program? If it's not, obviously you want to have all the mechanics, you want to have the fundamentals of the person, their background and all that, but just general, a person wanting to get started, they look like they can go to the gym 2 to 3 times a week and they're thinking 30 minutes to an hour is reasonable for them to get started. What's your main focus?
Total body.
Okay.
Total body. Stop fooling around with copying.
Don't say bicep curls. Don't say it.
Do not ever mention biceps in my vicinity, or in my virtual vicinity. We have a virtual vicinity today. Full body. I tell everybody this. Stop fooling around with trying to figure out different split routines. And hey, I don't know your experience level with that, with weightlifting or exercising and things. But we have this thing called, you can either do a full body workout, or you can do a split routine. Split routine is a routine where you'll choose 2 muscle groups to focus on for that day. So like a classic one, Nino was bringing up bro science earlier. A classic like bro split would be, you go to the gym, and you just want to focus on your chest. That's all you care about. So that would be called a chest split. You're just focusing on
they
your
say
chest.
like today's chest day or today's leg day.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's what I heard. You know what I mean? So it's like, okay, well, am I just supposed to only do crunches today? Like, because I only want to work on my abdominal muscle. You know what I mean?
That's exactly right. And I'm sure you've heard that. Most people have heard through the grapevine of social media or through friends that you could do split routines. You could do chest one day or back one day or legs one day. The simplest thing is to just do full body every time. Choose 2 days out of the week that work for your schedule. Work out for 30 minutes. Do one exercise for legs. Do one exercise for your shoulders. Do one exercise for your back. Do one exercise for your chest. And then leave the gym. And when you're working out, don't flick through social media. Like, actually try to be present. Be in the exercise so that you can actually leave in 30 minutes. How many times have I ever been to a public gym where, I'm in and out? Like, I've got things I can do during the day other than be at a gym. I'm in and out, and I'll get there and I'll see people there. And when I leave, they're still there. And I'm sure that these are people that are there for hours and hours. And part of the thing is that it becomes a social thing. Like, people go to the gym and it's a social thing. I think that can be good for certain people, absolutely, if it's motivating. But if you're a person who's looking to get started working out, I think that the best thing is to go in and get out. Full body, twice a week, 30 minutes, leave the gym.
So here's my question as a new person. Do I just, obviously I don't know what exercise to do. So when I go to the gym, I'm going to look for a personal trainer from them. But how do I know that they know, right? How do I vet them?
You don't know. You can look at like certifications. Most personal and not all, unfortunately, but most outfits require some type of certification in personal training. And the problem with that, and Nino will tell you, is that, like, what day is it? I could, on Wednesday, if I decided today that I wanted to become a personal trainer for LA Fitness, I could, on Wednesday, because I have a nice little block of free time on Wednesday, I could go online and I could look up an online certification for personal training and I could complete it in a number of hours. Take a quiz or take a little online test, pay some exorbitant fee, and then I could call myself a personal trainer, certified personal trainer. There are those types of certifications. It isn't all of them, but they exist, and there are gyms that accept them. So there's a very low barrier to entry to be a personal trainer, like very low. Some don't even require college education. You can just be a 19-year-old who paid $300 for an online certification that is not accredited in any sense. And some gyms accept that. Some gyms don't. I will give some gyms credit. There are places that exist where you have to have an accredited certification that actually requires many hours, many days, many learning modules, and is pretty comprehensive and is taught by like real people in the field. I have friends who are professors that work for these companies that actually do the teaching. These are people that have like actual PhDs who do the teaching. Those certifications are different. Those will make somebody an educated personal trainer. Doesn't make them a good one, but it makes them informed. Being a good personal trainer is a whole other thing that takes into account not just scientific knowledge, but also like perception, being able to feel somebody out, using intuition, knowing how to ask questions, knowing how to integrate things that a person tells you and then process it and then make a good decision. And decision-making skills are almost always lacking in personal trainers.
And unfortunately, most of those higher quality certifications, those trainers are going to the bigger gyms that charge their customers a lot more per month. That's typically what you'll see. And so, well, let's assume, and I think we could have a whole discussion about personal trainers and I've bashed on them enough on the show before, because I was that 17-year-old who I got my personal training license at 17 as a bro science bodybuilder. And I was like, I know everything. And then I was training clients who were in their 40s and 50s who had back issues and knee issues. And I'm like, just squat lower. Why are you complaining? So we can have a whole discussion about personal training. But assuming the person is going to the gym, wanting to design their own program, you mentioned full body 2 to 3 times a week. Okay. You're targeting one muscle group. You're targeting maybe how many sets are we talking about, and how many reps are we looking at if a person is starting out?
For a beginner, let me just summarize so I don't lose. I tend to lose people because I talk a lot. So far we've got a frequency of 2 times a week. We've got a total duration of each of those 2 workouts of 30 minutes. Let's call it 4 exercises total. One of those exercises should target 4 major areas of the body, basically. Let's say that total number of sets in terms of like working sets that exclude warm-up, because every exercise will require some level of very low intensity warm-up. I'd say 3 working sets and no more. Beginners could probably get away with 2 working sets easily and be great. So 2 to 3 working sets. And then the rep range, which is tied to the amount of weight that you choose. A beginner doesn't need to lift super heavy to make up ground. But, going super light where you're doing 30 reps per set is maybe not super productive for most exercises. And I'll touch on that in a second. But a good rep range to abide by would be like 10 to 12 reps for a beginner. So you've got 2 times per week, you're going to the gym. Each workout is 30 minutes. In each 30-minute workout, you're doing 4 exercises, 1 exercise for each of the 4 big areas of the body. You're doing 2 sets, maybe 3 sets, excluding warm-up. And in each of those sets, you're doing 10 to 12 reps. The 10 to 12 rep range thing is tied to the amount of weight that you choose to lift. And so like when people say, do 12 reps of this exercise, that means that the 12th rep should be a failure rep. Should be a rep where you barely finished the full range of motion. And if you tried to do a 13th rep, you wouldn't be able to. So, and that's a point that my students are always confused on, because there are very few people in the field, but especially on social media, who talk about what I don't think is a nuance, but what for some reason is considered a nuance, which is the difference between non-failure training and failure training. I wasn't taught this. It was sort of just assumed back in the early 2000s, but now it's not. It's the concept of, if I tell you to do 12 reps, that means that the 12th rep must be a failure rep. It's all you could possibly do. What it doesn't mean is it doesn't mean that you just stop after 12. It doesn't mean that you do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, done. Full while in your head, you know that you could have done 10 more reps. It doesn't mean 12 reps as in, okay, at the 12th rep, he wants me to stop, so I'm going to stop. When I say 12 reps and when notation dictates 12 reps, it means on that 12th rep, you might die. Like that's the assumed thing. And when I was in college, I wasn't taught that. It was sort of a presumed thing, which I'm wondering if Nino was kind of had a similar education to that, which is it was an assumed thing that when you train, it's assumed to be failure unless it's explicitly indicated that you're going to stop short of failure. Somewhere along the line, and I'm not sure where, maybe I became disconnected. I don't know. It became popular to do non-failure training regularly, and in some cases exclusively, which was a thing that sort of blew my mind, because training to failure has certain metabolic effects that help dictate adaptation, help dictate your ability to get strong and gain muscle mass and stuff like that.
So we're going, since we're on the topic, and didn't mean to cut you off there, but since we're going deeper, I do want to caveat this, because I do have a question about this, me personally, because I know what you're talking about. When I got into training, it was always train to failure. But then I think research had come out, and correct me if I'm wrong, that showed you can get the same metabolic adaptations training with 1 to 2 reps in reserve without the systemic fatigue that was associated with going to failure every single rep on every single set, every single day.
It is worthwhile to sometimes leave some level of failure, to not go to failure, to stop short of actual failure. To do it all the time is not shown to be of benefit. To do it in specific cases can be, and to be more specific, to do it when you're rehabbing an injury makes a lot of sense. To do it as a beginner when you're learning a technique is of benefit. To do it on a day where you're trying to recover from a really hard training session makes a lot of sense. But to do it exclusively is not supported by data. And I would definitely question data that indicates otherwise, because training to failure is a specific metabolic event. It's a specific neuromuscular event. Basically, enables you to recruit more motor units and stresses the metabolic pathways that provide you energy during a set. And those things enable growth. So that if you're avoiding that time and time again, long term, so 8-10 weeks down the line, you are going to cheat yourself out of a certain level of adaptation. And yes, I have heard that before. I have heard the thing of stopping short of failure to avoid, to sort of like try and maximize some level of adaptation while minimizing a level of systemic fatigue. My argument would be that systemic fatigue is important and it shouldn't be avoided every single time. And that data is old. I mean, and certainly old data needs to be updated, but the concept of repetitions in reserve from an adaptation standpoint, and I teach this in the class, which is that the research into repetitions in reserve and pay repetitions in reserve is a perceptual thing. It's a thing of, my trainer wants me to do 10 reps. My trainer loads an amount of weight on the bar that if I were to take it to failure, I should do 10 reps. But he says that I want to work out in a repetition reserve range of 8, meaning there's an amount of weight on the bar that if I did it to failure, I would do 10 reps. But I'm only going to do 8. So there's 2 repetitions in reserve there that I'm not going to touch. I'm going to leave. What some of the sort of, and I'll call it more like new sort of like small level research, not big sample sizes, sort of methodologies that are all over the place, that has been indicated to potentially target a strength response, a strength adaptation, while taking things to absolute failure seems to target, and again, small pool of data, seems to maybe target hypertrophy, which is muscle growth. So you have like failure training for maximizing muscle mass, a gain in muscle mass, hypertrophy. And then you have repetitions in reserve, or some level of repetitions in reserve, whatever, 2, 3, not going to failure, basically. That in some pools of data suggests that might maximize muscle strength. Here's the problem with all of this. You're a beginner. What are you going to do? Like, let's go back. You're a beginner. What does that mean to you? Do you know what hypertrophy is? Do you know what protein synthesis is?
No. And it's funny because while you're talking about all this, all that's happening in my mind is that Arnold movie where he says, make it hurt and don't be afraid to throw up.
Old school, baby.
That's the research that I have done. Thank you, Arnold.
Yeah. And I think that sort of research, it's not that it isn't important. It's that a bigger thing that I think it's doing is it's just confusing people. RIR used to be, and I feel like I'm just going to sound old talking like this, but RIR used to be just don't die under the bar. Don't do 10 reps. Just like stop when you have some energy left still.
Mm-hmm.
And then it got some research backing. And the other problem that I will say with RIR is that it makes it difficult to look. If you've got a professional trainer who knows what they're doing and they are doing the programming for you, they're writing out the exercises, writing out the sets, the reps, and they are on top of prescribing you progression, a way to progress, then RIR could work in terms of guiding you through adaptation while, minimizing some level of fatigue or injury risk. But the reality is that most people aren't that. They don't have professional trainers that are capable of using RIR in practice. All right. It basically doesn't exist, especially for a beginner. So the question is, RIR, this concept of repetitions in reserve, it's a perceptual thing. I'm going to load an amount of weight onto the bar where if you go to failure, which is a thing all humans understand, go till you can't go. But now I'm going to say, stop when you think you have 2 reps left. So I have 30 years of training experience, and I can tell you that a lot of the time, I don't know when that is. You could tell me, hey, Evan, I've got a bunch of weight on the bar. Go till you think you have 2 reps left. 8 out of 10 times, I'm going to be wrong. So how do you progress that? Over the course of 8, 12, 16 weeks, how do you progress that? It's a moving target, exercise by exercise, week by week, if you never go to failure. If you never go to failure, you do not have an objective point from which to progress somebody. You did 10 reps last week. I know that because your 10th rep was your last rep you could possibly do. Mm-hmm. So now I'm going to increase it by 5 pounds and we'll see if you can hit 10. And if you can, well, then we can say you got a little bit stronger. If all you do is RIR, you're leaving up to somebody's perception of when they are done.
Yeah. And
so you don't know when they've gotten stronger. They could just have a different level of perception every week because they had coffee this time, because they got better sleep last time.
Or they have stress in their life.
They're humans. So while I appreciate that research, it is, I think, disingenuous when the people who take a hold of that research don't super know what it means, and they don't know how to use it. And they treat it like it's panacea. Like it's like, hey, we have this new data set, small sample size, but I don't know what that means. This is now the gold standard, or this is important. We don't know if it's important. That's the thing. We don't know. And so I tell students that if you come across this type of stuff in research, or in social media, rather, not in research, but in social media, it's not that it isn't important, but it's that it isn't the only thing that's important. We have foundational things that are important. Training to failure is the foundational thing. Should you pepper it in with non-failure training, this so-called RIR? Sure, pepper it in, and there are applications for it that I spoke of before. But to do it as your sole source of training is silly if you're trying to gain adaptation over time. And mostly because it makes it very hard for you to progress, to understand objectively how to add weight to the bar.
No, I think and it's very well said. I personally have multiple questions, but I want to bring it back because otherwise we will go down a complete rabbit hole. But so 2 to 3 times per week, 2 to 3 working sets per muscle group, 10 to 12 reps for failure. Perfect. That's a good starting mechanism. oftentimes people don't necessarily focus on the muscle gaining. They focus on the wanting to just lose weight, because most people will start, especially as a beginner, wanting to lose weight. And I've tried to emphasize on the show how the focusing on muscle building secondary to that will lead to weight loss. But the number one question people will typically ask is, okay, well, what about cardio? Most people have the correlation that doing cardiovascular training is more beneficial for weight loss than actual weight training. So talk to me about, what do you feel is more important if you only had those 2 days? And if you wanted to incorporate cardiovascular training and you had another day to do it, how would you go about doing that?
Okay, so the simplest thing I would do is understand that cardiovascular exercise, also known as aerobic exercise, is defined as tachycardia over the course of 30 minutes. Tachycardia over the course of 30 minutes. Tachycardia is when your heart rate exceeds 100 beats per minute. So like average resting heart rate in a human is about 70 beats per minute. There's a range on that. Usually it's like between 60 and 80 beats per minute. That's like an average resting heart rate for a human. Tachycardia is when your heart rate exceeds 100 beats per minute. Aerobic exercise is defined as tachycardia, so heart rate over 100, for 30 minutes or more, continuously. You can do that with weights. Aerobic exercise is no mystery. Burning calories at a higher rate is no mystery. It requires tachycardia. That's how you burn calories at a higher rate. You enter tachycardia when you're doing weightlifting, traditional weightlifting. The thing is that your heart rate goes up when you do your set and shortly after, and then it drops back down into bradycardia range. Bradycardia is anything under 100 beats per minute. So if you do like traditional weightlifting, 3 sets of 12 reps type of things that I'm talking about, and you take a rest in between each set, let's say you take like a 90-second rest between each set, your heart rate's going to spike during the set and shortly after, but then it's going to drop back down. And then it's going to stay down for 40 seconds. And then it's going to go back up. And so you track your heart rate during weightlifting. It kind of looks like this. Now, the average heart rate through that might be like 90 beats per minute, something like that. You could increase that mean heart rate to a tachycardic level, which would make it more aerobic. And therefore, you'd burn more calories if you just did things at a faster pace. This is a big time point that is lacking, not necessarily in research. Again, this is a foundational thing that we've done research on for the last 20 years. It kind of all started around the Tabata era of exercise, the high intensity interval training era. It still exists today, but it doesn't get much attention, which is that if you just shorten your rest periods, like if you are stuck on doing traditional weightlifting because you just love it, but I want to burn more calories, but I don't have a lot of extra time to do elliptical or treadmill, then just shorten up your rest periods when you're doing your weightlifting. 3 sets, 12 reps, but instead of resting for 2 minutes, rest for 30 seconds. By doing that, you won't allow your heart rate to fully recover toward baseline levels in between sets. You'll kind of popcorn your heart rate up and up and up. Right? It'll spike during the set. It'll begin to drop, but before it drops below 100, you'll do your next set. So you're kind of volleying your heart rate at a higher level, which will raise your mean heart rate at the end of that 30 minutes. So that your mean heart rate might be 115, 120, 125 for that 30-minute weightlifting session, as opposed to like 85 or 90 if you were to do longer intra-set rest periods. So that's one thing. You can just shorten your freaking rest periods. It'll also get you in and out faster. The other way that you can do it is by circuit training, which enables you to basically constantly move. You're constantly moving from one set of an exercise to the next set of a different exercise to the next set of a different exercise. And each of those exercises works an area of muscle that doesn't highly correlate. So like working, the muscles of the chest do not highly correlate with hamstrings, the back of the thigh. So you could do an exercise for chest, like a chest press, and then you could turn around and do the leg curl machine, and you wouldn't really miss too much of a beat because your chest and your hamstrings don't highly correlate. So you could do circuit training. You could do a chest exercise and a hamstring exercise, and then an upper back exercise, and then a quadricep exercise, right? You're ordering them in a way where they don't correlate with each other so that the chest exercise that you did won't interfere too much with the hamstring exercise. And the hamstring exercise won't interfere too much with the upper back exercise. And the upper back exercise won't highly correlate or interfere with the, what did I say, shoulder or quadricep exercise. I'm talking too much. I'm talking too fast. Right? So that's a classic way to set up a circuit, is that you choose a group of exercises, 3 or 4, that don't highly correlate with each other, that the muscles worked during those exercises don't highly correlate. So they won't, in working one won't interfere with working the next. And that way you can do a set continuously. You're moving the entire time. And when we've done research on that, you look at the heart rate during a circuit style thing, and it's elevated pretty continuously. You can get a very high degree of tachycardia doing circuit training, and therefore a high degree of calorie expenditure. So I highly recommend either shortening your rest periods or engaging some sort of circuit training. That's the simplest way. If you were to, I think Nino's second part of your question was, if you could add a third day, what would you do cardio-wise? I mean, you could add a third day where your first 2 days you do traditional weightlifting, and then your third day you do circuit training. If you don't want to do more weights because you're sore from your other workouts or something like that, or you're just feeling tired, then you could do a traditional aerobic thing. So you could do something as simple as walking around your neighborhood. You could walk, you could jog, you could go to the gym, and you could do 30 minutes of an elliptical or walking uphill. I think that like a nice low impact thing to do is walk. I think if you want to increase the intensity, go to the gym and go on the incline on a treadmill, or find a hill in your neighborhood to do repeats on. I used to do that a lot because I used to live where it was real hilly, and there was a big hill by me, and I would just walk up and down the hill. And it was really low impact. I have bad hip, back, and knee. I'm in pristine shape, but that never hurt me. I could always walk up my hill. So I'm a big proponent of hill walking and of walking in general. One thing to note is that like within calorie expenditure is a function of work, physical work, whether you're running or walking. You run a mile, you walk a mile. You're going to burn basically the same calories. The difference in calorie expenditure between running a mile and walking a mile is negligible. When I first learned that, when I was 20 probably, blew my mind. And then we did a lab in our exercise physiology class where we proved it. Took the same person, had her run a mile, walk a mile. The calorie expenditure was in like 5 calories because it's a measure of work, physical work. So distance becomes the play. Distance. The way to sort of fire that up is to add a hill. So if you add a hill, that vertical displacement of the hill makes for more work because it's more strain on your heart. So your heart rate will be higher. So
1 mile on a hill just
will burn more calories than a flat mile.
But not stairs.
Stairs too. I mean, you could try doing, if you have like a good staircase, you could try stairs, and that's a lot of work. That'll burn calories pretty rapidly. I live in an area where there's a lot of stairs actually. That's also I think the drawback with stairs is that, particularly going back down the stairs, it's pretty good impact. I myself have had some back issues when I got really into stair work. I love stairs, but kind of just along the lines of what I was talking about a moment ago with failure versus non-failure training. Do both. Don't just do one. Like do some stairs, do some hill walking, do some flat walking, do some elliptical. I would really vary whatever you do. I'd vary it. And that honestly is a thing I would apply to weightlifting to a degree too. But the thing with like walking is it's pretty low impact, and that's why I like it.
Perfect. So we got weight training, we got cardiovascular training. The last thing I want to cover, because I think it's very important, is progressive overload. And you touched on it very briefly, but we got week 1 done. Somebody went in, they did their first week, they did squats, 100 pounds for 10 reps, right? Then the next week, they are able to do that same weight, but they could do either 11 reps, or maybe like you mentioned, they can add 5 more pounds and do the same weight they did last week. What is the best way for somebody to progressively overload, and why should they?
Let me progressive overload is a very broad arching concept. There are multiple ways to increase load. Progressive overload, it's kind of in the name. You progressively overload the system. And if you even deconstruct the word overload, you're going over the load you did before. You're going over the load you did before. You can deconstruct it further, because the word load can be taken literally to mean the weight that you had on the bar. So like you did squats 1 week and you did 100 pounds. And then the next week you did 105 pounds. You went over the load in week 2 compared to week 1. But load doesn't just mean the physical weight on the bar. You can increase load of a workout by adding an extra set. Keep the weight the same. Keep the actual load the same. The weight on the bar the same. You could just add another set. That will induce overload. You could add an extra exercise. So if you were doing 4 exercises, you could add another exercise. That would induce overload. You could change the exercise. So you could go, here's a simple one. You could go from flat bench presses, like just a flat chest press, to doing an incline chest press where you pop up the back of the bench a little bit so that your body is inclined relative to the ground. That would induce overload because it's new. Things that are new, things that are novel, induce overload to the body. That's because we adapt so specifically to the demands placed. So there are multiple ways to induce overload. Increasing weight on the bar is like the simplest, but before I get to the rule that I use in terms of like how to know how much weight to put, how to know how much weight to increase on the bar from 1 week to the next, I think it's an important thing to talk about when you do it in general. So in like the personal training world, it's like a big thing to like change things up all the time, like shock your muscles, always leave your muscles guessing as if your muscles have a brain. That's a great way to avoid adaptation. If you're changing your entire menu of exercises every single time, you won't adapt. You've got to do the same thing a bunch of times in order to adapt to it, in order to get stronger on that thing. So if you're trying to improve your squat, well, guess what? You got to squat. There's no way around that. You got to squat. You can do supporting exercises to the squat. So you could do hamstring curls. You could do leg extension, because these things will strengthen some of the supporting musculature of a squat. But if you want to increase strength on your squat, you got to squat. You can't do back squat one day and then, the next week, instead of doing back squat, you do leg press or something. You've got to do your back squat, man. And generally speaking, and there is some data to back this up. There's not a ton of data in this area, I will say. But if you're doing something for less than 3 weeks in a row, you are going to have a hard time getting stronger on that thing. So my general rule is to spend no less than 3 weeks with any menu of exercises. So if you're a beginner and you create a little program twice a week, 30 minutes each session, 4 exercises in each of those 2 sessions, Great. Go with that for a minimum of 3 weeks and don't change anything. Just try to get better on those things. In reality, it probably requires more than 3 weeks, but I will tell you that from experience, it is hard to get people to commit to longer than 3 weeks. People get bored, especially people that don't come from the workout world. They get bored. But I would say a minimum of 3 weeks with any exercises that you choose if you hope to get any type of adaptation. Okay, so let's talk about like how you know how much weight to add to the bar. There's a thing that is called the 2x2 rule, the 2x2 rule. And that means that once you can perform 2 repetitions at a given weight, more than you could before for 2 workouts in a row, you increase the weight. So I'll give you an example of what that means, because I think I kind of said it in a brain scrambled way. You do, I keep talking about squats. Let's talk about squats. You do squats. You're doing squats at a 10 RM load. So that means you've got an amount of weight on that bar where you could do 10 reps, but no more, right? Because again, failure training is the only way to objectively progress yourself. So you did 10 reps week 1, where that 10th rep was your last rep. Week 2, you come back and you felt good. You felt stronger from your first week of training. Cool. So week 2, you come back, you do the squats, you do, let's say, 11 reps. Great. You did an extra rep compared to last week. That's great. Let's say week 3, you did 11 reps. So you went 10, 11, 11. Week 4 comes, and this is pretty classic. Week 4, suddenly you do 12 reps. See a little jump in strength. Week 5 comes. You do 12 reps again. All right, now we've got a little pattern here. So you did 10, 11, 11, 12, 12. So now you've done 2 more reps, 12 reps. You did 2 more reps than you used to, and you did it for 2 weeks in a row. So week 1, you did 10, but by week 4, you did 12. And then on week 5, you did 12 again. So now we have 2 workouts in a row where you did 2 more reps than you used to at the start. That means it's time to increase weight. And that's the 2x2 rule. 2 workouts in a row, doing 2 more reps than you used to be able to do. For lower body exercises like the squat, we typically say to increase the weight anywhere from 10 to 30 pounds. Now, that's a pretty wide range. That tends to be up to the individual to make that decision. I always say that err conservatively. So take that to mean 10 pounds. Some people, usually dudes, will add 30 or more and then fail and then wonder why they failed and then wonder why they can't get stronger. But progressive overload is progressive, meaning it's incremental. Also meaning that it's the opposite of sudden. It's the opposite of sudden big jumps. Incremental and sudden acceleration are opposing ideas. So you could just add 10 pounds to that squat starting in week 6. And if you're still doing 12 reps, I mean, that's amazing. So then increase it the next week by 10 more pounds to see if it lowers your rep total back down to 10. And a lot of times that's what happens. So that's the 2x2 rule. For upper body exercises, typically we say add 5 to 10 pounds. So if it's a bench press and by week 1 you did 10 reps at a given weight, of course, failure. Week 4, you did 12. Week 5, you did 12. Great. So week 6, you'd add 5 pounds. So you go from 100 pound to 105 pound. And the same rule applies. If you still do 12 reps at 105, add 5 more. It's not rocket science, but it does take patience. I think that's what's lacking with a lot of people: patience and ego. Patience and ego are sort of the key inhibitors of progress. Lack of patience.
Crazy? You know what's crazy? This is exactly the same blueprint for what we do financially.
Oh, absolutely.
Insane. That patience, like that everybody wants to just get rich quick and they don't want to spend the time and the repetition to get it going. It's insane. My mind is literally like blown.
Yeah, I would say that it's a 1-to-1, very much so. Like most things in life, it's like patience and being able to like, honor your ego without fluffing yourself. Some things require you to like realize that you might not be the greatest thing since sliced bread. There are some things in life that require that in order to be good at them.
That's so well said. Dr. Schick, you've always kind of had a good way of putting things into perspective and just, although you can talk, it's talking that's very relative to what you're talking about. Oftentimes you'll hear gurus on the internet who will talk and they'll just talk to inflate their ego, going back to ego. And because they think that their way is the right way. I think just what I wanted to get from this, and I could have you on for 10, 20 episodes. There's so much I want to pick your brain on, but it gives people a good starting place. I mean, right there and then, what we've just talked about can last you 12 to 16 weeks by progressively overloading and implementing what's called a deload in between, where you can kind of give your body a little time to recover after overloading. You have 12 to 6 weeks of weight training. And then after that, you can then change the exercises, but the fundamentals are there. And that's really what I wanted people to take away from it, is to see how simple it can be and how complicated it can be as well, because you did it in 45, 50 minutes right now to make it so simple that I hope that was the takeaway for people. And as Pei mentioned, I mean, very well, it is 1-on-1 when it comes to finances. It's 1-on-1 when it comes to relationships. It's 1-on-1 with everything in life, because everything does take patience. It does take discipline. And sometimes you got to go to failure. And despite what there might be out there, sometimes you got to really push yourself, because through that is where you'll learn the most about yourself and where you can really grow. So again, I think that's really well said. I would love at some point to get you back on, because I want to still ask my advanced questions about how slow I need my eccentrics to go versus my concentrics, and what my genetic potentials are, because it's just fun. There's so much to be said.
Just real quick, for the grad level strength class, we just did a lab about lifting velocity, contraction velocity. Okay. It's funny that you just bring that up. We just did it this last week.
I'm just fascinated by it, by just going like on a 2-3 second eccentric and slowing it down. And I get so much more of a burn than I do if I have a buddy of mine who just trains and he just lifts fast. And I mean, velocity, just quick, and can push weight. I'm over here tempo training and he's pushing out more weight than me, but ultimately I'm bigger, which is really what matters. So
that's all that matters.
I'm kidding. Talking about ego, no ego here. Anyways, everybody, thank you.
You're self-aware though.
I am. I'm very well aware of it. You didn't help me at 24 putting down my ego when I was trying to act like I was the biggest in the class. But all that being said, I appreciate everybody for tuning in. This was a fun one. Again, so much more I can do. Dr. Schick, I'll try to get you back on at some time to ask some more advanced questions. But Pei, I hope you learned a lot. I hope the listeners learned a lot as well. Anything you want to wrap up with, Pei?
No, this has been really fun.
And what I learned today echoes, like it's stuff that it's already in the back of your mind. It takes 21 days to form a new habit, and is exactly what, we're talking about. So thank you. And it's motivation for me to get started.
I hope it helps. And I'm super appreciative that you invited me on. This was really fun. And I'd love to be back.
You will. I promise you will. All right, everybody. Thanks again. Take care. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Finding Financial Fitness.